Now that the elderly patriarch has passed away, I find myself in the role of the eldest son, essentially the decision-maker for the family. Allow me to make it clear, the entirety of the inheritance belongs to us. Mom and Nolan will receive nothing. Prepare yourselves for this, and I apologize for the inconvenience, but Ryan would likely prefer it this way. It's more fitting for Aaron, who consistently prioritized Ryan's well-being, to inherit everything, rather than it going to the useless Olivia and Nolan. Despite Ryan's declining health, Aaron and his wife, Grace, never bothered to visit him, despite numerous invitations. After the funeral, their sudden appearance shocked everyone as they made audacious claims about taking the entire inheritance. Nolan, the second son, was visibly upset, and rightfully so. We had always strived to do what was best for Ryan, and Aaron and Grace's unbelievable behavior was intolerable. While pondering this, Nolan finally spoke up, expressing his displeasure. The words he uttered turned Aaron and Grace pale. I am Olivia, a 71-year-old housewife, living with my husband and Nolan. Ryan, as the second son of a major corporation-owning family, did not take over as CEO, but still had substantial assets. Despite his wealth, Ryan was frugal, detesting wastefulness and encouraging savings. However, Aaron and Grace, who were extravagant and often spent recklessly, faced financial trouble and sought our help regularly. On one occasion, Aaron and Grace approached our home together. Nolan, avoiding them, had gone out. Ignoring our disapproval, Aaron addressed Ryan, saying, "Dad, we're struggling with our finances this month. Could you help us out a bit?" Ryan, frustrated with their reckless spending, frowned. Grace chimed in, attempting to persuade Ryan, "You know, we have Colton too. He's about to enter high school and wants to go to a prestigious private school. But private schools are expensive, right? Colton's your beloved grandson. Maybe you could help a little." Their audacious request, despite needing help, astounded us. However, due to Ryan's deep affection for Colton, he agreed to provide financial assistance, setting strict conditions to prevent wasteful spending and ensuring Colton wouldn't suffer. Aaron and Grace, aware of Ryan's soft spot for Colton, exploited it, using him as a reason to secure the financial support they sought. The same pattern repeated itself, with us reluctantly agreeing to give them money following Ryan's instructions. I transferred a reasonable sum to Aaron and Grace's account, hoping for a positive change in our lives. However, our efforts seemed futile. More misfortune struck when Ryan collapsed, prompting Nolan to call an ambulance. Ryan was diagnosed with advanced cancer, and the treatment offered no guarantees. Devastated by this news, we resolved to support Ryan until the end. I visited the hospital daily, while Nolan, despite working, spent his days off by Ryan's bedside. Yet despite his deteriorating condition, Aaron and his family never visited. Ryan grew increasingly weary and longed to see Colton, whom he adored. Unable to bear seeing Ryan so lonely, I contacted Aaron and Grace, requesting them to visit with Colton. However, they responded dismissively, stating it was a hassle and never showed up. Ryan's battle with cancer lasted about a year, taking a heavy toll on him. After a long struggle, Ryan passed away, leaving an indescribable void. Nolan supported me, even though he must have been hurting too. Despite being overwhelmed with grief, I couldn't help with the funeral arrangements. Aaron and Grace never offered assistance, remaining heartless even in the face of Ryan's death. Ryan's funeral, a quiet affair attended by close family and friends, saw no sign of Aaron and Grace. After the funeral, as Nolan and I placed flowers and sympathy cards on the altar, the doorbell rang. We exchanged glances, realizing it was Aaron and his family. Colton's presence, after such a long absence, felt strange. Aaron casually mentioned they couldn't make it to the funeral due to a family trip they had planned. Grace and Colton followed him into the living room, their audacity astonishing us. Apologetic words seemed insincere, and their lack of empathy hurt deeply. I was even more taken aback when Aaron uttered something unbelievable. "Now that the old man's gone, as the eldest, I'm pretty much in charge. Listen up, The entire inheritance is ours. Mom and Nolan get nothing, just so you know," he declared confidently. In disbelief, I blurted out, "Sorry about this, but Ryan would be happier this way. It's better for the inheritance to go to Aaron, who always considered Ryan first, than to useless Olivia and Nolan." Aaron and Grace's outrageous claims stunned me. After leaving everything to us and enjoying their easy life, they now showed up to claim Ryan's inheritance. I couldn't bear the thought of even a part of the inheritance ending up in Aaron and Grace's hands. While we were struggling with this dilemma, Nolan suddenly spoke up, flipping the situation. "I've been thinking Colton doesn't really look like Aaron," Nolan stated. Everyone, including Aaron's family and myself, was shocked by this statement. "Now there's no time for this, Nolan. What are you saying? Colton is definitely Aaron's child. He just takes after me." Grace reacted strongly to Nolan's casual remark. Her face turned pale, as if a taboo subject had been broached. "Why are you so flustered?" "I just mentioned it casually because I was curious. Also, Colton doesn't seem to resemble Grace either, or is it just me?" Nolan suggested. As we took a closer look at Colton's face, he didn't seem to resemble Nolan or Grace, especially since Grace claimed he looks like me, which didn't seem quite right. Aaron, apparently thinking the same, turned pale and glared at Grace. "Are you accusing me of cheating? Could Colton not be my son?" Aaron said, grabbing Grace by the collar. Grace frantically denied it, saying, "No, that's not true." But her denial lacked credibility. The situation was escalating, and without intervention, it could spiral out of control. Eventually, Nolan stepped in, saying, "Calm down. It'll all be clear once we do the DNA test." We decided to conduct the test. Grace kept arguing, saying there's no need for that, and doubting our parental bond. Although Aaron complained about this, he seemed determined to take a DNA test with Colton in the near future, not swayed by Grace's words. For a few days, I had little contact with Aaron and Grace, mostly spending my time sorting through Ryan's belongings. Then, one day, the doorbell rang again. As Nolan and I wondered who it could be, Aaron entered the living room alone. It was unusual for him to visit our house by himself. I made coffee and offered him a seat. With a look of humiliation, Aaron placed a document on the table, the DNA test result. It stated that there was no paternal relationship between Colton and Aaron. In other words, Colton wasn't Aaron's child. "I've been deceived by Grace. Colton must be the child of her lover. She betrayed me," Aaron exclaimed, his face turning red with anger. While cheating is undoubtedly wrong, Aaron may deserve some sympathy for being deceived. However, I couldn't find it in me to sympathize with Aaron. We hadn't forgotten Aaron's past unreasonable behavior, and Grace's betrayal didn't justify taking Aaron's side. I wouldn't be satisfied until I thoroughly confronted Grace. "Please help me. Your oldest son was deceived, and you must be upset too. We need to unite as a family now," Aaron pleaded, taking her hands. Still, I couldn't bring myself to cooperate with Aaron, and my feelings were cooling even more. Seeing this, Nolan spoke up. "Sorry, but I can't support you, Aaron. You betrayed Dad too. We haven't forgotten that Aaron was one of those who abandoned Ryan. If he had supported Ryan, then maybe his loneliness would have been lessened." Thinking of this, I couldn't easily forgive Aaron. That was a different time. I was trying to spend time with my family, but they're not our family anymore. Despite our reluctance, we agreed to call Grace. Since the decision to do the DNA test, Grace had been taking Colton out often, rarely coming home. Grace didn't show her face even when Aaron contacted her, so I decided to contact her using Ryan's inheritance as a pretext. I wouldn't normally do this, nor did I want to, but I did because I have a secret plan, Nolan said soon after. The doorbell rang, and it seemed Grace and Colton had arrived. As I opened the door to let them in, Grace frowned at Aaron's jacket hanging next to the door. "You didn't tell me Aaron was here. Did you deceive me, Olivia?" Grace exclaimed, about to leave with Colton. "If they left now, calling them under the guise of discussing the inheritance would be pointless. Just as I was wondering how to keep them, Nolan stepped forward. "Wait, Grace, calm down. If you leave now, things might get worse. It's better to talk here where we can control Aaron than alone. It's in your best interest." Certainly, if Grace and Aaron were to talk alone, the outcome could be unpredictable. Aaron might even become violent in his anger. In such cases, probably only Nolan could restrain him. Convinced by Nolan's reasoning, Grace and her family entered the house. As they passed through the living room door, Aaron glared at them. In response, Nolan, urging calmness, said, "Settle down," and then seated everyone and served coffee. Grace and her family looked visibly uncomfortable, but we managed to calm the situation. At that time, I didn't understand why Nolan had chosen such a complicated approach. Why did he need to gather us all here? Wouldn't talking to them individually have worked? But later, thanks to a trump card Nolan revealed, it all became clear. I understood why he had gathered us in that place. The room fell silent, with both Aaron and Grace seeming to gauge each other's reactions. Unable to bear the tension, Grace suddenly apologized, saying, "I'm so sorry. I never intended for this to happen. I was deceived, too." Grace, in tears, recounted her story. Her affair had begun over a decade ago with a colleague from her workplace. At the time, she had already been in a relationship with him before meeting Aaron. However, her lover was married with children. Grace claimed they drifted apart. And that's when she met Aaron. Aaron fell for her at first sight and passionately confessed his feelings. Grace, whose feelings for her lover were fading, started dating Aaron and eventually married him. About a year later, Grace reconnected with her distant lover. She hadn't expected to meet him again as she had quit her job by then. Their rekindled romance led to Grace becoming enthralled once more, and that's when she became pregnant with Colton. However, around the same time, her lover moved away with his family, effectively abandoning Grace. She knew it was wrong not to tell Aaron that Colton wasn't his child. But she didn't have the confidence to raise a child alone. So Grace lied that Colton was Aaron's child and continued that lie. If he hadn't left, I would have been honest about the affair and that Colton wasn't Aaron's child. It's all his fault. Grace continued crying. Colton was silent, shocked by the revelation. That doesn't excuse what you did. You betrayed me. You destroyed my happiness, Aaron retorted. Grace's excuses seemed incoherent, and even Aaron couldn't accept such explanations. The argument escalated into a fight, with Aaron and Grace grabbing each other. As if to admonish Aaron and Grace, Nolan clapped his hands, saying, "If you want to fight, go ahead. But I have something important to say too." Nolan's words immediately stopped their quarrel. The mention of the inheritance they were fixated on seemed enough to calm their anger. Seemingly agreeing to a truce, the two sat down. Seeing them seated, Nolan smiled with satisfaction and pulled out an envelope from his pocket. "This is Dad's will. He had it written by a trustworthy lawyer during his time in the hospital. It clearly states how the inheritance is to be divided. I was unaware of the existence of a will. Probably Ryan had directly asked Nolan to arrange for a lawyer." Nolan opened the envelope and began to read the contents of the letter inside. What he read was astonishing. The inheritance would be divided, with half going to my wife Olivia and 1/4 each to my son Nolan and my grandson Colton. The atmosphere changed dramatically as Nolan read this line. Aaron turned pale, exclaiming, "That can't be right." He lunged at Nolan, snatching the will and reading it, his eyes widening to their limits. "How can this be? Why is there nothing for me?" As the eldest son, Aaron had always assumed with certainty that he would receive a larger share of the inheritance. Yet hearing that he wasn't allocated even a small part, Aaron couldn't possibly accept it. Disheartened, he slumped to the ground, repeatedly reading the will, hoping for a different outcome. However, the content remained unchanged. Taking the will from Aaron, I reread it to confirm, and it seemed there was no mistake in what Nolan had read. "Naturally, Aaron, You and your wife had received substantial support from Dad. Dad was well aware that all the money was being used for your frivolities. That's why he decided not to leave anything for you. Nolan spoke calmly. Ryan's secret trump card had indeed managed to plunge Aaron into despair. By the way, I've already informed your parents, as per Dad's instructions, that the portion of the inheritance going to Colton will be temporarily held by your parents. So it's better not to think you can misuse Colton's inheritance, Nolan continued. Aaron was left questioning how this could be. It seemed that Nolan and Ryan had carefully acted to prevent selfish wastage. In that case, surely the portion allocated to Colton would be used for his future. Ryan had been concerned about Colton until the end. The two issues that surrounded us, Grace's infidelity and Ryan's inheritance, were finally resolved. We no longer needed to devote time to Aaron and Grace. After the discussion, Aaron's family returned home, looking dejected. The next steps were for them to discuss among themselves. As expected, Aaron and Grace ended up divorcing. We who had heard Grace's confession that day became undeniable witnesses, and Aaron demanded substantial compensation from Grace. Further disputes arose over the custody of Colton, as both wanted sole custody, knowing that Colton would eventually secure the inheritance. Myself, Nolan, and Grace's parents intervened in the negotiations. Eventually, it was decided that Colton would stay with Grace's parents until he came of age. Once the divorce was finalized, Aaron started visiting our house frequently, saying, "Let's live together." Feeling unable to accept him as family after all that transpired, we moved out, almost fleeing from Aaron. We changed our contact details, making it unlikely for Aaron to reach us. Grace, for her part, seems to be having a tough time. From what I've heard, her parents are furious over the incident. They paid the compensation, but until she repays it in full, she's not even allowed to see Colton. Meanwhile, we are living a happy life, following Ryan's philosophy. We carefully save the inheritance we received and make sure not to squander it, even though we have money. Since then, Nolan has been working diligently and was recognized for his abilities. John from B asked him, "Why don't you come to work for our company?" So he changed jobs, and now he seems to be an executive at the company where John is the CEO. I still consider Colton my grandson despite everything that happened, so I asked Grace's parents if I could visit him. He recently got into his first choice high school, so we celebrated by going out for a delicious meal. The incident with Aaron and Grace remains a deep emotional scar, but it also taught us the importance of relationships. I will use this lesson to live my life going forward.